Alright, changing the front brake pads on my Subaru Outback. Obviously you got to take the wheel off. You'll need a 14mm socket to get the bolts out of the caliper. I've already done that. There's going to be one on the bottom down here and then one on the top. And those are the bolts that are pretty visible. They're on the, you'll see those rubber boots. So once you get those off, you can take the caliper off, kind of rest it up here. You don't want to let it hang down because you have, there's going to be the brake line tube, so you don't want to put too much stress on that. I just kind of balance it right on top. Just check, make sure these are nice and lubricated and moving freely, the guide pins. And basically, if your brakes are, if the pads are stuck in there, just kind of carefully use a flathead screwdriver or something to get them out. You can see not quite worn all the way. And then the new ones go right in there. If you have that anti-squeak or something, you can put it back here. Some cars seem to need that, others I find doesn't need it as much. The next thing you're going to need to do is basically push the calipers back in. Since these pads are much thicker, I just use a C-clamp to basically carefully get that in. You can see on these front brakes, it's got two of them. Get those pistons back in. So you basically just, very carefully kind of get that in. Otherwise, you're not going to get it to clear those new pads. You'll want to take a peek up in the hood at the brake fluid reservoir. Make sure that doesn't spill over, because if you've added a lot of brake fluid as the volume in there has gotten lower, you'll be pushing that out. Alright, you can see the reservoir is filled up to the top, so just going to use a syringe to suck a bunch of that fluid out so it's back to the top of the max line once those pistons are pushed all the way back in. Alright, I got the pistons pushed all the way in. Now those will fit back over the brakes. And you just want to make sure when you're putting that, there's sort of a flat surface here on the guide pin, and that kind of needs to be so it locks in place here so it doesn't turn. But it really only will line up the one way, so just make sure you're get it thumb tight, and you'll see that it lines up pretty good. So that's basically it. Do both sides. Obviously you don't want to do one wheel and not the other when you're doing brake pads. So alright, just now that everything's back, you always make sure that's going to be floating and sliding like it should. You don't need to bleed the brakes because you shouldn't have introduced any air into the brake lines, but you need to pump the brakes definitely a few times to build up the pressure, get those pistons back so everything's tight. So definitely do that before you start driving. And always when you're doing this sort of work, use a jack stand. Keep yourself safe.